The ending of Elvis. Even when he was still alive, Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, was the stuff of Hollywood legend. A 19-year-old Memphis, Tennessee, truck driver takes the globe by storm with an explosive combination of country music, gospel, and rhythm and blues. After dominating the charts, he goes on to dominate Hollywood, starring in over 30 films in just over a decade. And just when it appears that he has been washed up and forgotten, he returns to prominence with a television comeback spectacular in 1968. Many films about Presley's life, from John Carpenter's 1979 television movie starring Kurt Russell to the 2005 CBS miniseries, conveniently end at this point of triumph, eluding or outright ignoring the last decade of his life, when artistic stagnation and debilitating substance abuse issues turn the king into a clown. Elvis, the long-awaited biography from imaginative filmmaker Baz Luhrmann, arrives in 2022. For starters, no previous film about Elvis Presley has possessed Luhrmann's colorful, maximalist approach, a chaotic swirl of color and sound aiming to convey the sensory assault Elvis' youthful followers must have had upon hearing his music for the first time. But, more significantly, Luhrmann and his screenwriters Sam Bromell and Craig Pearce don't gloss over the superstar's tragic last years, which he spent in a gilded Las Vegas cage at the hands of his manipulative manager, Colonel Tom Parker. As anybody who remembers the old Elvis vs. Young Elvis postage stamp issue will attest, it's a period that many Elvis enthusiasts would want to forget. However, for Luhrmann, the era is not a postscript or an uncomfortable fact, but rather crucial to the film's singular point of view. Consider the conclusion of Elvis. Naturally, there will be spoilers. The Snowman and the Showman. Whether he's representing 1890s Paris or 1920s New York, Luhrmann's extravagant, often anachronistic visual flair always draws a lot of attention. Elvis, with its swirling roulette wheel camera work and hip-hop remixes of Presley tunes, is no exception. The film's most innovative concept, though, is perhaps how it presents the tale of Elvis from the perspective of Colonel Tom Parker, played by Tom Hanks with a mound of prosthetics and a thick Dutch accent. Parker reflects on his life with the king as he lies dying in a hospital bed in Las Vegas in 1997, roaming through a phantom casino as memories rush back. Parker has come to be viewed as a monster in the years following Presley's murder, exploiting his one and only client's confidence and stealing far more than his fair portion of the income, per Smithsonian. Although Luhrmann's film does not dispute this account of events, Parker saw himself as Elvis' other half, the carnival barker, or snowman, to his sideshow freak, or showman. The film's most intriguing contradiction is between Parker's innocent, almost victimized view of his personal connection with Elvis and what we, the audience, see on screen. This conflict is highlighted early in the film by a quick flashback to 1974, when Elvis collapses backstage before a concert and Parker makes it plain that the only thing that counts is that he gets back on his feet and performs. Getting rid of the Colonel. With extra background, we relive that moment in 1974 when Presley falls as the film reaches its final act. Elvis has been singing for years at the International Hotel in Las Vegas since Parker signed him to a virtually lifelong contract in exchange for the remission of Parker's large gambling debts. Parker has also promised Presley his first worldwide tour for years, dating back to the 1968 Return Spectacular, only to postpone the tour for various reasons. The truth, however, is revealed just seconds before the king collapses. Parker is postponing the tour because he entered the country illegally and does not have a passport. His name isn't even Tom Parker, and he's never been a colonel. After collapsing, Presley is given an amphetamine shot to get him up and running again for the concert. He approaches the stage, intoxicated and enraged by his manager's treachery, and fires Parker in the middle of his performance in breathtakingly theatrical way. Even if it is only a fantasy, it is a tremendously fulfilling moment in the film. According to Elvis writer Alana Nash, via USA Today, Presley and Parker's professional feud happened after a concert, not during one, and for an entirely different cause. Furthermore, Parker's immigration status would not be revealed until after Presley's death. There is no evidence that the king suspected Parker of being anything other than the West Virginia native he claimed to be. Bills, bills, and more bills. Parker's countermove, on the other hand, is true to reality. Parker retreats to his office after being sacked by Presley and creates an invoice for unpaid promotional labor dating back to 1955, totaling more than $8 million. This is based on a true occurrence, according to Nash, albeit the actual cash amount of the invoice is unknown. Elvis' father Vernon, played by Moulin Rouge evil villain Richard Roxburgh, informs his son that Parker's debt would bankrupt them. Elvis runs out of his suite, only to discover Parker waiting outside for him. The two men had a heated argument. Elvis clenches his teeth and threatens Parker. In response, the Colonel dismisses Presley's career, telling him, unfairly but truthfully that the comeback special crowd that adored him was a ruse, led to cheer by a flashing applause sign. The sequence serves as the film's conclusion in many respects, as Butler and Hanks give it their best. In this scene, Hanks offers the film's mission statement, proclaiming applause. Elvis' entreaties fall on deaf ears, and he walks out of the Colonel's life for good. Are you lonesome tonight? But forever is never as lengthy as it appears. Luhrmann captures the aftermath of Elvis and Parker's feud from outside the International Hotel, highlighting how interwoven these two men are. Through the windows, we see Parker's office on the virtually top level of the hotel. As the camera moves higher, we glimpse Elvis' penthouse apartment, just one story above. Parker's ceiling is Presley's floor. They could never be separated even if they wanted to. Meanwhile, Elvis sits at his piano and performs a minor key rendition of his 1960 ballad Are You Lonesome Tonight? Having Elvis perform melancholy renditions of his own hits while pouting is a stylistic element used multiple times throughout the film, and it never ceases being a bit ridiculous. Finally, King collapses on his sofa in front of his 3 television screens, beaten. When Vernon comes in to check on him, Elvis asks his father to ask Parker to get medication from his doctor to help him sleep. Colonel Tom Parker, like Elvis Presley's prescription medication addiction in his latter years, is difficult to kick. A year later. The film ends with the title card 1 year later. Suddenly, it's 1975, and Elvis' career has taken a new direction. Presley is now a media attraction, a real-life version of the sideshow act Parker always saw him as. He's gained weight, he's divorced from his wife Priscilla, Olivia DeJonge, and seldom sees his daughter Lisa Marie, and when he's not playing in Las Vegas, he's shut up in his Memphis house Graceland like a hermit. There is one ray of light, as discussions to have him feature in a version of A Star Is Born with Barbra Streisand are supposedly underway, but we in the audience know it will regretfully never happen. Streisand will instead star alongside folk singer/songwriter Chris Christopherson. Elvis and Priscilla had a romantic talk outside of his private plane, named after his daughter. Like most of the speech in the film, its major objective is to establish the current status of Elvis' life and profession, as well as his hopes and goals. Elvis still hopes to produce one excellent movie after hundreds of bad musicals, and he fears that nothing he's ever done will matter when he dies. The film portrays this as Elvis' final discussion with his ex-wife, despite the fact that he would live for another 2 years, which the film totally skips over en route to the King's death. The King has died. The video jumps ahead 2 years from that event on the tarmac to the revelation that Presley was discovered dead in Graceland at the age of 42. Instead of attempting to replicate the grandeur of Elvis' burial procession or the tremendous outpouring of public sadness that followed, Luhrmann chooses to use archived footage of the genuine thing. He also included an audio snippet from President Jimmy Carter's remark on Presley's death, in which Elvis said his following was huge, and he was a symbol to people the world over for his country's vibrancy, rebelliousness, and good humor. Not bad for a child who scandalized the country just 2 decades before. In not recreating Elvis' burial, the film also ignores the fact that, according to historian James Dickerson, Parker reportedly donned a Hawaiian shirt and baseball cap to the ceremony and sought to broker agreements with mourners, via the New York Post. We'll never know if his actions were motivated by callousness, sociopathy, denial, or some mistaken sense of showmanship in order to keep everyone talking about him. His casual attire and seeming lack of emotion have also been cited as proof in the long-running conspiracy belief that Presley faked his death and is still alive, via E! News. The Last Performance. The video goes back to Presley's farewell concert in Las Vegas, only weeks before his death, as the country mourns the loss of the King. Luhrmann has been hesitant to cast Butler as the so-called Fat Elvis, but in this scene, the young actor is decked out in wide jowls and a double chin, mumbling and stumbling as he sits down at the piano, his microphone held by one of his musicians, and belts out an emotional rendition of the Righteous Brothers' Unchained melody. The camera follows Butler in an intimate, rather gawky manner, sweat dripping down his face. It's unlike any of the film's musical pieces, but we quickly see why, as Luhrmann cuts from Butler as Elvis to video of the King himself singing, backed by a short montage of the real-life Elvis in many of the scenarios shown in the film. It's a startling shift. as we witness how perfectly Luhrmann and Butler have reconstructed these scenes from Presley's life. It also serves as a reminder of how powerful Elvis' voice and presence remained even in his dying days. He puts up a spectacular performance at the piano, and the audience hangs on every note. Who assassinated Elvis Presley? In the end, Elvis is unable to speak for himself, so Parker does it for him, as he has done for the most of their relationship. Parker wonders who or what murdered Elvis as he shuffles across his purgatorial casino floor in a medical gown and IV drip. It was not the pills and narcotics, which were provided by physicians who should have known better and facilitated by Parker, Vernon, and Presley's whole entourage, the so-called Memphis Mafia, that contributed to Elvis' death. And it wasn't Parker's selfish administration of Elvis' company that kept him performing at a halt for years. Parker is all too willing to exonerate himself of that responsibility. No, we are the ones who murdered Elvis, with our unending love for him and his inability to say no. Parker's monologue in this scene is a fascinating point in the film. Luhrmann and Hanks maintain Parker at arm's length, reluctant to dictate how the viewer should feel about this shady conman. Instead, they let Dutch Carney and potential murderer Andreas Cornelis Van Kouks know us all the way to the finish. As Parker dies, a field of stars dims until just two remain. One star fades gradually, while the other develops and flashes like a rhinestone before fading in an instant. After the screen fades to black, we are treated to a series of postscripts that explain how the drama of Elvis and the Colonel unfolded in the years following Presley's death. The film skews what Presley and the rest of the world knew about Parker's origins. In reality, it wasn't until 1980 that anybody could prove that he was of Dutch heritage and had entered the nation illegally as a 30-year-old man, per Smithsonian. Parker's financial mismanagement was eventually exposed, and following a series of litigation taken on by Elvis Presley Enterprises, a judge decided in 1982 that Parker had no legal claim to any portion of the Presley estate. Parker spent his final 2 decades in Las Vegas, puttering about one casino floor after another, draining his enormous riches down the drain. During those years, he made few public appearances or pronouncements, only emerging from the shadows on rare occasions such as the 1993 issue of the Elvis postage stamp, via the Washington Post. Meanwhile, Presley, far from being the forgotten lounge singer he imagined he'd become, is still an international sensation over 50 years after his death, and Newsweek ranks him as one of the highest-earning dead celebrities of all time. His life and work continue to arouse both praise and criticism. As any visitor to Memphis or Las Vegas will attest, Elvis is still hard at work, as is Colonel Tom Parker in certain ways.